good morning, folks. I certainly hope folks can hear me and that this is going to go off successfully. And I've shared my screen, so hopefully that you are seeing now what I'm seeing. And if not, someone will let me know. I'm going to start my timer and try to make sure I value your time, that we can get through this and make sure that we have a successful time together. I would encourage you, if you have not used generative AI, and I've sat in many sessions with teachers that 50% of them have not yet logged in to ChatGPT. So please feel free to take out a device and go to ChatGPT, ChatGPT, and ask it a question. Even just say hello, and it's quite all right. I'm not offended. Be on your device with ChatGPT or whatever AI you'd like to use, and dig deeper into whatever we manage to talk about. So please, if you've not yet used an AI, or if you have and you want to keep working, please feel free to use that as a second mind as we go through. So I really do wish I had more time to make this even a shorter presentation. It's really important that we talk about some things, but there's so much to talk about. This could be an entire 5-day session. And so I wish I had more time to shrink it down even some more. Everything I say about AI technology will be out of date, likely before I finish this presentation. At the very beginning of this week, ChatGPT said they would no longer require a login. So that's a major step forward. It also means that there's less barrier to entry for our students. They can just go and start to use it. So that might be an issue for you as well. However, everything we talk about pedagogy is not going to change. Good pedagogy is going to remain good pedagogy. So keep that in mind, that all the things we know from teachers' education, from your previous presenters, is not going to change because of AI. And you've had some great opportunities to discuss pedagogy. It was interesting to read through the schedule about things you've been discussing. And so when you think about all the things you've taken notes on in these previous sessions, now we're just going to add another layer of AI. I'm trying to share as much as I can with folks. And so I have a OneNote, bit.ly, 6 April 24. And if you want to send any particular comments to me as we go through, you're welcome to do that as well, bit.ly/SAVAL, and those links will reappear as we continue through the session. So very briefly, because I know folks really do have a varying experience in AI, what is generative AI? Basically, you take a whole bunch of text, and by a whole bunch, really it's everything that's ever been written that the AI engines could grab a hold of, and including stuff they should not have grabbed a hold of. And you might have remembered that the New York Times was suing ChatGPT because they were using New York Times writing. So they take all of that massive amount of text and they throw it into an engine, and they look at how all that text was put together, and they say, here are the patterns of the way that text is going together for people. And this is specifically in English. Most of this work is being done in English, which is problematic. And they figure out the probabilities of how often words follow other words, and then they add a little bit of randomness so you don't always get the same thing. And that same thing is avoided by changing the temperature of the response. And you can change the temperature all the way down to 0, and then you'll always get the same thing. Now, you may want that if you're doing some particular aspect of AI, but typically we put the temperature at about 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and that gives you a nice variability. If you move it up to 1, 1.2, it just goes crazy and starts speaking nonsense. So you have that chance of changing that temperature. And so that's really how we get AI. I'm going to share with you on my next slide. This is a screenshot. I'm going to flip over to a web page so you can see it a bit better. And oh, that's what I did. Give me 1 second. There we go. This was an opportunity for a data engineer to look at how AI was working in the background. And so he started with the prompt, intelligence is. And when he did that, he then ran through a lot, by a lot I mean thousands, of possibilities as a result. So when he says intelligence is, and I'm not sure how clear you can see in the background, but you can see it changing in the background on my screen, all the different responses that ChatGPT has generated. And so on the right-hand side, you can sort of see the map of where it could go based upon the initial prompt of intelligence is. And you might also see a couple of black bands, and that's where ChatGPT kind of runs out and says, I've sort of exhausted all the things I can say on that particular thread. On the left-hand side, humans love to see patterns. And when I look at this, I sort of see the exact sort of neural net that we envision when we see electric energies in the brain. And so you can sort of see how we've tried to map that dendrite explosion in the head to a AI in a computer. He has a couple, if you happen to go to the website later, he has a couple of other prompts that he does the same thing to. And you can see how it is entirely generative based upon the probability of going from one word to the next. Okay, so let me continue on here. If you happen to like reading, and as teachers we do, there's a couple of options here. The one on the left involves no mathematics and is written by Ethan Mollick. He's a prof at Wharton School of Business. He's not an educator per se. He's a professor, of course, but not a classroom educator. And he's just written this book, literally released on April the 2nd. I spent a couple of late nights making sure I had it read before I joined you here. It's a really nice survey of where we are in generative AI at the moment across a variety of fields. Relatively short, relatively inexpensive, a nice read. On the right-hand side, I'm a mathematician, I'm a math teacher, love the math stuff. An option for you folks who want to get into the mathematics, the yellow books, really sort of textbooks on how to teach students how to work with AI in the background. And of course, Stephen Wolfram, if you're familiar with anything in mathematics, wrote a book on what ChatGPT is doing, really sort of at a university level, but again, an option for you to dig into. I think my biggest message, and you'll see it really is one of my biggest messages, is never trust what you get out of ChatGPT or any AI for that matter. And I learned it to my own peril, and I'm sure you've read news stories where other people have gotten into trouble because they just have a blind trust in the AI. It's always going to be a problem that we anthropomorphize. We treat the AI like a person, and there's this psychological tendency of humans to trust the written word. When we're little children, our parents read to us from the written word, so we trust that. Our religious leaders, we have sacred texts, and we have faith that when something is written down, there's some veracity, there's some truth to it. And so we lull ourselves into this idea that it's always going to be true. I encourage you, put a sticker on your computer, don't trust AI. And just to remind yourself, when you read through, it is beautiful at crafting incredible word sequences, but there may not be true. We'll see an example of that in a minute. A couple of options for you to try. The great part is there's a lot of free options available. Otherwise, it can get ridiculously expensive. The project I'm working on with the Ontario math teachers, it costs about 12 cents per question that a teacher asks. And so that really starts to build up in the background. Now we're using the most advanced AI, the cheaper, the less expensive, the free AIs, much less costly, fractions of cents, but the responses aren't as good. So it's a kind of a sequence that you can sort of decide how good a response you want based upon how much you're actually willing to pay. The example at the bottom, Hugging Face, I did not choose the name, is an opportunity for you to sort of really be involved in a community of people who are playing with a lot of free services. And there's pre-constructed assistants. So teachers will create an assistant that's speaking like Abraham Lincoln or, God forbid, Donald Trump, and gives you a way to sort of jump in without having to do all of the heavy lifting. So an opportunity for you to play with those, and we'll talk more about the issues with some of them as we continue. But free doesn't mean free. There are restrictions on things that you can do, and there are restrictions on how much you can do. So depending upon which tool you're using, you may find there's a limitation. Even the paid version, I pay $20 US a month for ChatGPT Plus, and it stops me at about 40 prompts in 3 hours. So there are limits. It's incredibly expensive. They are not making money on users like us. So just keep in mind that as you're using it, it's costing money, and it's not going to be free forever. There's a huge background cost going on. And there's also an environmental cost. And I want to make sure that people recognize that when we're using AI, it's consuming an incredible amount of electricity and an incredible amount of water. The water is used to cool the servers that are being run by the AI. And so the cost to generate the model, to take all of that text and make it into something the AI understands, is massive. And so every new model is just increasing this use at the very beginning, and then there's the incremental cost day by day. And I think we'll see a lot more conversation about that in the future. There are pre-packaged options. There are companies who will sell you a complete AI package, and they purport to do everything. I'm not going to talk about these models. There's a link there, and there's a content in the OneNote that you can access. I'm not going to talk about them. For one, they use the free models. They are aware of everything you put in, and so there's always difficulties there in terms of using them in schools. So you're more than welcome to try them out at your own leisure. And some of them actually have some really cool things, but I'm not really worried about cool things. I'm worried about good pedagogy. So if you're looking for 30 tools to use in your classroom, we're not really going to do that because first of all, they're all going to change. They're not all free, and often more it's about engagement rather than actually teaching students something specific. So the question becomes, and I love the way the title was phrased, how soon and how often? And I break it up into two parts. For students, we have no control over the students. They're going to do whatever they want to do outside the classroom, and often inside the classroom. You can now buy a pin in the US that you tap it just like Star Trek, and you're automatically talking with a generative AI. We all know, I'm old, we used to have students put earbuds in their ears and have some friend with running a wireless system to speak to them in assessments. So students will do whatever students do, and they work like water, finding whatever gaps there are. So we have no control over the students and how they're going to use generative AI. But for teachers, I really only have one word when it comes to how soon and how often. It really is now. And I encouraged you at the beginning of the session, if you haven't used generative AI, open up your browser right now, go to ChatGPT and just say something to it. That would be an incredibly important step forward for you to do that. If you're a pro at generative AI, that's great. But if you haven't yet used it, stop right now and open up your browser and start using it. Ask it anything, and we'll get more into that in a second. The reason that we want to do it right now is because this is the theme in the media right now, that AI is going to destroy education. And the good news is that it's not, and the bad news is that it likely is. And we don't know how it's going to play out. This is a monumental change, and it's occurring at incredible rates of speed. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but we do know that nothing beats a caring individual in a classroom working with a student. So whatever AI does, it's never going to change the relationship that students and teachers build in the classroom working on their subject matter. And the other good news is AI doesn't really work well in an educational environment. Expert use requires expertise. It's a phrase that Derek Bruff, he's a prof at Vanderbilt in Nashville in the US, and it really struck home that that phrase was important. Expert use requires expertise. Anyone can go up to ChatGPT and start talking to it. But if you want something good out of it, you have to know what you're talking about. And so what we see is, and this is from Ethan Mollick's book that was published this week, that writers who know how to write are the best at getting the best writing out of ChatGPT. I'm not a good writer, so I don't necessarily remember, oh yeah, I should, end on an ominous note. I would have said, make it more scary, which likely doesn't have the same effect as ending on an ominous note. You get the idea of building to a scary conclusion, whereas mine would just be a series of jump scares all the way along in a rather inconvenient way. As well, good editors provide instructions that are more clear to the AI. Again, as a beginning writer, I shouldn't say a bad writer, as a beginning writer, I don't have necessarily the skills to actually bring out the necessary ideas that the AI needs to know. And I don't necessarily have the reading background in English literature to be able to provide the AI with the context it needs to do what I want. The example that Ethan Mollick gave was John McPhee. I didn't know who John McPhee was. He is a Pulitzer Prize nominee several times on nonfiction. So he writes nonfiction in a fictional way. So he has a very unique style. I would not have known to ask the AI to do that because that's not my expertise. So students do not have that expertise. They still need to be able to read good literature. They need to be able to describe good literature. They need to be able to read history and understand how to criticize history, because otherwise they're not going to be able to interact with the AI as effectively. So we're going to start with your expertise, because we all come into this room as educators. We have our subject specialties. We have our pedagogical expertise, and during this weekend, you've deepened that a little bit more. And so you likely remember Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky said that when a student or a teacher wants to learn, there are things they already know, and there are things they can do themselves. But then there are things that they need someone else. And Lev called it the more knowledgeable other. And the more knowledgeable other sits beside the student and engages them in a conversation, in an activity that moves them into something that they hadn't learned, and now that they do. And without that person, without that more knowledgeable other, the student, the teacher, can't move into that new area. Well, clearly, that's what Gen I is going to be doing for us. It knows more about every aspect of education than any one individual. Professors are awesome. When you go to a university and you speak to a professor about problem-based learning, they know everything about problem-based learning if that's their specialty. If you go to ask a problem-based learning professor about, I don't know, assessment on large-scale multiple choice tests, that's not going to be their expertise. So you're going to find another professor to talk to. ChatGPT, generative AI, they all have that expertise across a wide variety of areas. And the nice thing there is not how can I use large environment, and you can set them off one another without having to get two professors arguing. You can then have a generative AI engage in that discussion about how you can balance large-scale ministry tests with problem-based learning in your classroom. That more knowledgeable other that we now have available to us is really going to push your craft forward. You're going to be able to talk to someone at any time about how you're going to make your classes better. And that's an incredible opportunity that we have now before us. The project I'm working on, it's really nice to see in the background. I get to see all the conversations that our teachers have with the AI. And I'm going to show you a wall of text. Do not read it. That's not the point. The full conversation, I think she went on for about a half hour, is available in the OneNote at any time. And there's also another conversation. She went back, she analyzed what she talked about for the grade 7 class, and then she talked about it and changed it with the grade 8. It was a really nice development to see about how she was engaging with the AI. So here's a wall of text. And what she's doing is she's talking to the AI about her class, and she's creating what we call a digital twin. She's saying to the AI, I want you to imagine in your mind my class. Here are all the students in it. Here are their characteristics. Here's how we like to run the class. She's creating this model, this twin, in the AI's system so that the AI can understand the context she's working in. Now, do you have to do this all the time? No. What's going to happen in the future? The AI is going to track what's going on in your classroom, and it's automatically going to know that, plus or minus some privacy issues there. But what she can do is she can tell the AI who she is, who her students are, and how they want their classroom to work. And this AI comes back, and again, wall of text, the AI comes back and says, okay, I understand what's going on. Here's the digital twin I've created, and going forward, I'm going to keep this in mind as I answer your questions. And if you go and read the ongoing conversation, it does a really good job of remembering her context, remembering her environment, and reminding her, oh yeah, you wanted this to happen, and you want to make sure that you bring that forward. So great opportunity to have this more knowledgeable other in your classroom prompting things. When we get to the grade 8 conversation, she goes, okay, I need to be able to make sure I do this because the AI reminded me in the grade 7 conversation that I didn't do it for them. So my first and most important strategy is make sure that you have a collection of non-AI writing somewhere. I'm old. I've been teaching. I've been in the education environment as a student, for 20 odd years, as a teacher for 30 years. I have a lot of writing that no AI has ever touched. I have a very specific writing style. I have a very specific tone. There's words that I use that most people don't use. So I have a collection of content that no AI has ever seen. And it's definitely me. It's my voice. And so when we moved to writing comments, I used an AI. I loaded in all of my writing. I said, this is how I write. I want you to start writing comments with that voice, with that structure, with that style, with those words, so that when you create it, it sounds like me. Everything going forward, you might not be able to trust it. Well, how much did I use AI to write this essay? How much AI did I use to write this email? So make sure that you have somewhere a collection of things that AI has not touched, something that's definitively you, because going forward, that's going to be more difficult to keep track of. So your homework is make that collection, create a folder. These are the things that I wrote without AI assistance, and go from there. It's a really, really small step that's going to make big dividends in the future. Case in point, I did not use AI to write this presentation. I thought it was really important to make sure that you didn't feel that you could have just gone to AI and asked for something that I'm doing right now. Work with AI with someone, especially if you're brand new. Go to a coffee shop, pull up a computer with your best teaching buddy, and start asking questions with each other. We know from research that when students work on computer, it's much better if there's two on a computer than just one-to-one, which is surprising because we spend a fortune giving one-to-one computers here in Canada. It's much better experience for both students to work, both teachers to work with an AI simultaneously rather than one-on-one. There's a much better interplay, there's much better questions, much better prompts. So please, grab a coffee with your teaching buddy and just jump in and ask it questions that interest you. Once you get rolling, the AI will start to prompt you with some ideas. Treat AI like any other team member. Whenever you're in a meeting, pull up an AI, and when someone asks or a particular question, ask the AI as well, and see what research, what ideas are already out there in the community. It really does break that blank page problem. And it's really what students are using it for. Students have this anxiety when they face a blank page about not knowing what to write. And as I mentioned, I'm not the best writer. So it was really nice for me to run into AI 7 years ago and say, okay, how can I use this to sort of break that thing that I don't know what to say? So you go up to the AI and say, I have to write an essay on I always say things from Canadian perspectives, and it might not make a contextual meaning for you folks. Donald Trump, everyone knows Donald Trump. I have to write an essay on the way Donald Trump uses language to convince people. I would know how to start to write that. So I could ask AI to say, write me a first sentence for an essay that's going to talk about how Donald Trump uses language to convince people. And it would give me that. The problem, of course, becomes when the students write the whole essay with AI, but reminding the students to only give it structure, only give it that initial prompt really makes all the difference. It covers daily tasks really well. It makes life so much faster. Emails to parents is the #1 thing that I think our teachers use at school to make sure that the tone is correct, that the information is helpful. We often write things from a teacher perspective, and that's not necessarily something that parents directly understand. And so I've had coached teachers say, okay, take that email and ask ChatGPT, ask any of the AIs to rewrite it in a more helpful way for a parent. And it works well for anything that we generate as text. Do I use it to create all of my things? Absolutely not. But I do use it as again, that second mind that gives me good feedback. I work with the editor of our school newspaper, and the students write the school newspaper. I take the school newspaper, I read it, and then I throw it into ChatGPT and I say, what are some issues? What are some things that I need to know about this that may cause problems for different audiences that might choose to read that? I don't know everything. I don't know, again, old. I don't know how the kids are talking these days. ChatGPT has a much better idea, and it can find those errors or problems for me. I do include responses to admin. I tend to be somewhat abrupt, and so it often helps me to tone down my responses to admin when they write something and I perhaps disagree. And ChatGPT is that filter that allows me to express my strongly held convictions in a way that perhaps is more amenable to the administrators I'm talking to. And lastly, of course, teachers receive a lot of information. ChatGPT is really good at summarizing. Remember the whole model at the very beginning where it's choosing words based on probability. Mathematically, it's really easy to contract text. And so that's what it's really good at. It's not making things up when it's contracting text. It's just bringing the best and the largest ideas in a more compact way. Again, something for you to try. If you're not using ChatGPT, pull it up right now and throw your latest email into it and see what it will do with it. There is a lot of industry about prompt engineering. What do you ask the AI and how do you ask it? And when it first came out, it was like, my thought was, it's not going to matter. We thought we would teach people how to use a card catalog in a library to find information. And then we moved online with online card catalogs. And then we moved into Google. And we thought, well, we'll teach people how to search really effectively in Google. And it didn't happen. That's not how people work. We can try to teach them how to search effectively, but that's not how people decide to run their lives. In the same way, we're not going to be able to teach people how to prompt effectively. And in the end, it's not going to matter. The AIs are becoming smart enough, in quotes, that they will interpret our questions based upon the questions everyone else is asking and get the context and the necessity from that. And I was in my classroom 2 days ago, and I was looking over the shoulder of a student, and this is what they wrote as the prompt. They had asked about a system of equations, and he literally just wrote, explain how. No capitalization, no period, no setting the context. He just threw in, explain how. And the ChatGPT responded, okay, he obviously needs to go through step by step how we go through and solve this. So don't fret, again, it's that blank page problem. Don't worry about what you're going to say to the AI. It will figure it out, and you will get the answer that you want eventually. And clearly, you can ask the AI what to ask it. Ask it what you should ask about your favorite hobby. I'm a motorcyclist, as you can likely tell from the picture in the back. I will say, what should I know about riding roads in Montana in the US? And it will say, well, you should ask about these kinds of questions about riding the roads in Montana. It can ask, again, my project is on elementary school mathematics. What questions should I be asking about how students need to learn fraction division? And it's going to say, well, you have to remember about this issue, and this issue as you're working through your lesson. And you can then dig into a particular issue and ask it for ways that you could use models to represent fractions, representations that might be assisting, things to avoid as well. So ask it how you should be asking it. And I'm also not well versed on the Israel-Gaza. And so when that began October 7th and forwards, I did ask it, okay, my students are going to come into my class and they're going to ask me questions. Well, how do I feel about it? What should we do? How can we make things better? And I don't have those answers. I'm not sure anyone does, but asking ChatGPT what things I could safely parameterize our discussion did help me help my students work their way through those feelings and those issues. So is it always going to be right? No, but it is certainly helpful. And I want to bring up an example that's really important and that very clearly you'll see that I forgot. Never use a negative prompt. never use a prompt that asks it not to do something. And here's my example. I teach at a residential school, so they have boarding. And one evening I was in boarding and I put a Coke bottle in the fridge to stay cold as I went around and spoke to the kids about their studying. And I came back and it was gone. And I thought, I want to make a wanted poster to find the person who stole my Coke. And so I asked ChatGPT, I need a picture of someone who looks like a thief holding a Coke bottle. And I realized I spelled thief incorrectly, but that's neither here nor there. And so it gave me a response. It gave me this. Looks like a thief, classical thief, dressing, has a great Coke bottle, awesome, but it has a sword. So I can't put up a poster in my school of a weapon. That just wouldn't fly in Canada. So I said, can you remove the weapon? And here is a negative prompt. I'm asking it to take something away. But mathematically, that's not how it's seeing it. It's seeing it as weapon. And so sure enough, it made the weapon bigger. Because I mentioned in the text weapon, it's going to build on it. And so there is a knack to prompting that you can't ask it not to do something. You always have to phrase it positively. And so it got worse. It was late at night. So I kind of got mad at it and I yelled at it and I said, remove the knife. But that's a negative prompt. Now the emphasis is on the knife. And sure enough, it got a bigger knife. So life is not fun all the time with AI. Great Coke bottle, though, and definitely looks like a thief. And to add insult to injury, to make things worse, it then told me that the images had been created without any weapons. So in the end, never trust AI. It is always going to surprise you with how nuanced, how crafty it is at hiding its errors, and it will convince you to say, no, I did exactly what you told me to do, even when it clearly did not. So just be careful. So there's a whole bunch of content that we can provide from AI. The nice thing about it is you can personalize it for your class. And that's really part of the power of AI, because it knows things that I have no clue about. I have students who are interested in skateboarding. I have students who are interested in horseback riding. I know nothing about either of those two necessarily. So I can ask it to bring in ideas. I am mindful of time, and I don't want to make this an episode of us just going through AI and asking it questions. You should play with that on your own. But what's nice is I can ask it about anything that I want within the frame of a multiple choice question, an essay prompt, a rubric. It is great at developing rubrics. It's all textual based, and it can scan through all the ideas that you've mentioned and create really nice prompts that help structure it for that specific assignment. Too often, rubrics are like wrote really well. Well, we really want to make sure that the prompt for the student within the rubric is a bit clearer than that. And so if you put in the assignment and then say, okay, AI, what's a good rubric for that? It will produce it and do a really good job at it. Because it's text-based, you're not going to necessarily get the hallucination, the errors that can crop up because it's working simply with text. So if you haven't yet tried it to make a rubric, likely the number 2 reason for using AI. When it comes to assessment of student work, a very problematic area. The more work the student puts in, the more work you should put in. There's nothing going to be worse in the future that when you ask them to write a major piece of work, an essay, a short story, a reflection on an historical document, and they spend a lot of time on it by typing it into AI, and then you use AI to mark it, to assess it. And so we just get this AI loop that no one is actually seeing this content, and so no one benefits from the process. We still want to make sure that we have a good idea of what our students know and understand, and that the student is actually engaging in meaningful work. It is not going to be easy. One of the things we realized very early in mathematics with calculators and photomath and all these other things is that nothing outside the classroom has any validity anymore, because we don't know who is doing it. or what is doing it in this case. So being in the classroom, observing, taking notes about the students is much more important. The small skills that you begin to collect become much more critical. And a research paper that's in the OneNote mentions very clearly that when you do try to use ChatGPT for assessment, it gives often some really good feedback. It often makes mistakes, and it's massive in its content. There's a lot of fluff to it, a lot of stuff that really is unnecessary. And teachers, when they're marking content, when they're marking student work, they don't have the time for fluff. We tend to be very short-winded, very brief and direct in our comments because we don't have time to do all that. And that's a good thing. The student often don't read the feedback. So the shorter the feedback, the more often they'll actually get something out of it. So just keep that in mind. So smaller pieces more often, and the metaphor I use is build a puzzle, use puzzle pieces, don't just take a whole picture all at once. Use small pieces to build the idea of who the student is as a learner, rather than take one big picture and try to make it worth your time. Reminder, never trust AI. Working with the students, I encourage my students to actually use it to check their writing, to check their coding. I don't ask them to use it to check their math. It's not good at math. It's slowly coming along, but it's still not very good at math. So there are existing tools that they can use to check their math, but they can engage in a conversation about their metaphors of math. What does it mean to solve an equation? How do I actually describe dividing fractions? Those kind of things it can do a fairly nice job at. We can look at ways at engaging the AI in a conversation. And one of the fun things is you ask it to say, okay, we can talk about, let's say, the Israel-Gaza situation. And I'm going to ask questions and you're going to respond and give me feedback on whether or not I understand what's actually going on in Gaza and Israel, what the historical context is, what the political, the religious, the geographic situation is in that area. And that's a really nice way of bringing the AI's ability to bring all of this massive text together in ways that I could never do research in such a short period of time. The idea of personalized learning is very much on the horizon, but there are huge issues here with privacy, as we'll mention in a second. When you're talking with an AI about students, do not mention any names. Do not mention, I have a student. Always mention archetypes, metaphors, because I know that India has a new data privacy law. The Americans have a law. We have a law here in Canada. And it's going to become very challenging as we move forward in terms of making sure that students' data is safe and that we're not creating a digital twin of the student in the AI that people can then capture. So talk about student archetypes. Imagine if I had a student who, and that way you can ask the AI how best to deal with, say, a student with a learning challenge, with dyslexia, those kind of things. Picture a student with dyslexia, and that way you're not saying, Jimmy has dyslexia, how do I deal with Jimmy? That's a real no-no when it comes to student privacy. And, just being a nice teacher. Which brings us to ethics. All of the AIs try to give you an option not to capture your data and your student data. I deliberately bolded the third line. Even if it's not tracking the specific data, there are metadata. There's data within the data that they may be using to train their models. So the devil, phrase in English, the devil is in the details. Just because they're saying we're not using the prompt you write doesn't mean they're not taking that prompt, running it through some mathematics, and extracting information that's not something you deliberately typed. So we have to be very careful not to put student data into the systems because it's really going to be a challenge in the future. Microsoft, big business, if you're using a school work account, depending upon what system you use, it's about the safest there is. Big companies who use Microsoft are not going to want to have Microsoft using their data. So there's likely a fairly good data privacy there. Google, they have a really bad track record when it comes to tracking stuff. So I would be cautious with using Google. And any of the other AIs, never trust that they're not going to be stealing your stuff. Incredible issue with bias. All the big models are trained on Western, US, English data. And that was one of the real problems we had with our project about math. When you ask a math question inside of ChatGPT, it gives the American answer. And so we had to do a lot of work adjusting the lens so that it started to speak from Ontario, from Canada. A lot of it is older, and you can often see that in some of the words that it uses. There's a slow growth of non-US, non-English centric content. There's a project in Paris looking at European languages. The problem is that it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of energy to build the models initially. And so it's going to take a bit of time before we move away from this sort of Western US focus. And last but not least, cheating. As I said earlier, anything outside the class can and will be done by AI. Students don't necessarily have the reflective sense to stop themselves. And so you're going to want to make sure that you focus assessment mostly within the classroom space, because as soon as it goes outside, you really don't know how to do, who's doing it. Most of the comments are try to make it authentic. It's a real challenge. It's really hard to make really good assessments, even with ChatGPT helping you. And so the last two is being transparent. Why are we doing this? I teach mathematics, and the common response to this from the students is like, why are we learning this? And so I have to lay out a path why I'm making this assessment and why I'm asking to make sure that AI is either not involved or involved in only this way, and give them that structure to work with, and sort of, this is why we're doing it, and I need you to write it so your voice is developed. I need you to do the math so your skill is increasing. And it's going to be a real challenge going forward. And the other challenge we've got is an over-reliance. Studies are already coming out on how it's affecting people's creativity, people's approach to solving problems. And so be explicit when you're using it, and be explicit when the students and the can or cannot use it. As I mentioned, I chose not to use AI to do this presentation because I wanted to make sure that you got an original voice that wasn't just something you could get from ChatGPT. This is not going to be an easy path, but one thing I know about teachers, they're natural problem solvers. It's literally their day-to-day job is solving problems. And so we have got this. We do have a way to go through this. So in closing, I did not ask AI to write this, but I did put it back into AI. And I said, so we wanted strategies about including generative AI in classrooms, and this is what Perplexity AI gave. I think I touched on all of these aspects, except establish clear usage policies and guidelines, because that's a job above our pay grade. We don't make policy as teachers. So administrators, educational professors, ministry, government officials, they're the ones who are going to do that for us. And we're going to have to find a way to work within that, those policies and guidelines. But hopefully the other ones we've managed to touch on. Perplexity AI is a really nice system that pulls in actual references. So if you go and look at the full response in the OneNote, it actually will give the references to what it mentioned. It's a really nice way to work with AI if you haven't used it yet. Okay, I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but what I'd like, I clicked the wrong button. There we go. Keep going. There we go. I think we have some time for, hopefully have some time for a couple of questions. My contact information is all there. It's also in the OneNote. Folks are welcome to contact me with questions at any time. I work a lot in the States, and so I have a huge community of American educators I get to talk with, and I'm quite happy to have folks in India ask me questions as well. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Calvin. There are a lot of questions, and I've kind of, because of the time constraint, I have summarized everything in just one question.
Oh.
typical parent and a typical principal of a school, given a choice, we would not like to introduce ChatGPT because, according to us and many of the parents like us, we feel that you lose the creativity. The student loses the creativity because in India there are few colleges as of date who are grading zero to the students' project, and they check the plagiarism and they are graded nil. So it is kind of introducing and getting addicted to ChatGPT is not a very good idea. I'm so sorry to because there have been a lot of questions and there are a lot of things which have been written. There are a lot of people of the same opinion. So how would you advise us? We understand that there has to be a balance in everything, but then this seems to be quite risky way. Your
So
advice.
you have exactly the question that everyone has, and I wish I had a very, very simple answer. I refer back. I'm a mathematics teacher, and I was the elementary school student when calculators came into the classroom, and math teachers were sure that we would destroy mathematics by introducing calculators. I then became a classroom teacher as graphing calculators came in. I was well into my career when photomath and the ability to get the complete solution to the problem by students became popular. None of that destroyed mathematics. None of that destroyed mathematics education. It did change it. It did change the way we introduce topics, the way we explain things to students, the way we assess students. And so we cannot stop AI. There's a Greek myth about Pandora opening the box and all this stuff coming out. We can't put them back into the box. And so education, whether we like it or not, is going to have to adapt to something that is, for lack of a better term, smarter than us. And we need to take advantage of it. We need to box it when we need to box it. So for younger children, we don't use calculators with younger children because we want them to get their number skills solid. So we're likely not going to use a lot of ChatGPT with younger students. As we get into older grades, we're going to be using ChatGPT because students outside the classroom, are going to be engaged in ChatGPT. I have some students who are very deeply engaged in AI, and they, for the most part, 90% of them are asking much better questions in class because of their self-study with AI. And this has been mathematics. So I think that's going to be our opportunity. It's going to be an unpleasant shift. There is no doubt about it. It's going to be an unpleasant shift. But students outside the classroom are going to use it. So within our classroom space, we're going to have to recognize that, try to use it to our advantage, and get used to the uncomfortableness of not being able to control it. If you're uncomfortable with it, talk to a math teacher about calculators and photomath, because there's 10, 15, 20 years of math teachers having to cope with it. And so talk to the math teachers to say, okay, how did you deal with assessment when you knew that the students could do it automatically? It's not going to be easy, but if things were easy, it wouldn't be anywhere near as enjoyable.
Thank you so much. It seems to be a debatable topic. And since we have the contact details, maybe we'll get in touch with you via email. Thank you
Please
so
do.
much.
Have a great day.
The mic to Palak.